people. So, but what is obsession, Will? That's what I was wondering. So I've been and looked up obsession, and this is the dictionary definition. It says the state of being obsessed with someone or something, as she cared for him with a devotion bordering on obsession. So it's an idea or thought that continually preoccupies or intrudes on a person's mind. So this is all really quite negative stuff, isn't it? Intrusion, preoccupation, as if it's a barrier towards a person living their life. We've got this as well. It
suggests that it's something that cannot be controlled as well.
Yeah, I see what you mean. It says here the meaning. This is from IELTSmaterials.com. It says thinking about something or someone too much in a compulsive manner. Too much. There's a judgment, a value judgment there.
Yeah.
Having characterized by obsession. The word obsessive is derived from the word obsession, first used in 1897. So yeah, that's a very plain definition of it. But if you go and look something up like that, it's very clear that this is something that a person should be discouraged from being, isn't it? To be obsessed with anything, it can't possibly have any upsides.
Yeah, that's what they think. I reckon, I've had relatives say, "Haven't you grown out of that yet?" With a smile on their face, but really they're thinking you should have left this behind by now. You should be watching other programs, or into. It's like with music, I had a friend when I was I would have been about 14. A friend of mine said, I think Wham or George Michael was something really big in the charts, and he says to me, what I like this George Michael single, he says, and he's going on about this song that was a big hit, and he said, what are you listening to at the moment? And I said, Ken Freeman. And he said, who? I said, Ken Freeman. He said, who's Ken Freeman? I said, he composed the theme music to the Tripods. So there's the single. I absolutely adore this.
So do I.
So I said, well, he's a composer. I said he's also an engineer, sound engineer, built his own synthesizers. And he's actually on Jeff Wayne's musical version of War of the Worlds. He plays the synth strings, which are astonishing because they sound like real strings. I used to look down the credits on that album thinking, where's the orchestra on this? And it's all Ken Freeman's keyboards. So that suddenly made him cool, because he was on Jeff Wayne's musical version of War of the Worlds, and that's cool.
I remember being at secondary school, and somebody asked me what my favourite group was, my favourite band, my favourite pop group. Yeah. And even though I did like pop music, and I did like Wham and a lot of these bands, I gave my answer as the BBC Radiophonic Workshop.
Yeah. Well, everyone else is listening to Duran and Spandau Ballet. I'm listening to the Five Doctors soundtrack.
What I don't understand is I loved Duran Duran and Spandau Ballet and all those bands too. I really did love them. But for me, so why I didn't have the social intelligence to think, it might be better if I say one of the pop groups that I like, but no, BBC Radiophonic Workshop. And I had those sort of looks, if to say, what? It's as if.
But that thing of having you not left that behind now, and why should I leave the BBC Radiophonic Workshop behind? It's great.
They sincerely didn't know what I was talking about, my family were also. As I got older, some members of my family were very, very condemning of it. My grandparents were very religious. And my grandfather in particular, who was very much was very much a man's man. He played rugby. He was a fireman. He was a welder. He'd done all these things, but he was a practicing Baptist. And I think it's not unfair to say, Grandad, he was a religious maniac, for want of a better. And he would quote the Bible all the time. And I asked for the Doctor Who book of Meglos for my 16th birthday, and he looked at me. And he was very, very similar. It was a case of, haven't haven't you grown out of that yet? And he quoted, he quoted Corinthians 13:11, and he said, when I was a child, I spoke as a child, I understood as a child, I thought as a child, but when I became a man, I put away childish things. And he emphasized that line, and actually he didn't just look at me, he glared at me as if to say, okay, enough is enough. That was just one book, one paperback.
Yeah. Was the Apostle Paul thinking of Doctor Who when he wrote that? I don't think he was. But I can see what you mean. Yeah, you should have put away Doctor Who by now.
Yeah, that was my grandfather's feeling.
That's for kiddies, and you're a man now. Yeah.
Because by the time when he was 16, for example, his dream was of joining the Navy, and he was trying to get himself signed up at every opportunity. He was really hungry for life to get bigger. And the day that war broke out, my granddad, he couldn't wait to go to war. He was chomping at the bit. He really was.
It's like with young girls. At what point is it wrong to take a teddy bear to bed? You get girls in their teens and even in the late teens and the 20s who will keep their teddy bears. Does somebody say to them, it's time the teddy bears went? You're a woman. I don't know if they receive those kind of condemnatory remarks in the way that we do about Doctor Who. But really, so what if I still like Doctor Who? Why does it matter?
There are different social pressures for women and for men and for women, for girls and for boys, and to take it through your life. I mean, we are our generation. We're the first generation that was sort of allowed to take our youth with us through life, to carry on wearing jeans and things like that, and not tucking your shirt tails in, all that kind of thing. But for other generations, I think it was slightly more difficult. And if you still read Doctor Who books or Narnia, Narnia are children's books too.
Yeah. But
I think people look at them slightly differently. Yeah. Because of the Christianity angle to them, and obviously because they're seen as being proper literature. But people were leveling that at me from a very, very young age, that I was obsessed with Doctor Who. Yeah. And I thought it was as if they needed to classify me somehow as being whatever they needed me to be. It wasn't about me, it was about them. But that did continue into adulthood, and I got increasingly perturbed by it. As I say, that I was no more obsessed with Doctor Who than my friend Nick was with the Albion. No one seemed to mind that. But I had no idea, sincerely, I had no idea there was any stigma of any kind associated to loving Doctor Who, or to necessarily being obsessed by it, because the way I looked at it was that, well, everybody loved Doctor Who. Why wouldn't they? Yeah. And for a long time, people did. Up until Star Wars, I think people genuinely did. And a lot of that, I think a lot of that persisted as well. Until 5 Doctors. I think it took until the cancellation crisis in '85 for people to really open fire on Doctor Who, because the BBC were seen to be publicly losing belief in it, and therefore it was seen as okay to kick the dog when it's down, and therefore by default to kick us too.
Yeah, for me, there was a noticeable change. Season 18. So when it was City of Death and Destiny of the Daleks and Nightmare of Eden and all that, there were millions, well over 10 million people watching every week. I know there was the strikes on ITV and all of that, but it was being watched by 9-10 million weekly for years. And then when we got to season 18, ITV had suddenly found the antidote to the ratings, and they brought Buck Rogers in the 25th century. So obviously you've got a very handsome man as the lead, a very beautiful woman starring alongside him, a very cute robot voiced by Mel Blanc. You've got it's an American production, so the special effects are way ahead of those on Doctor Who. And I can remember watching part 1 of The Leisure Hive and being so excited that the theme tune was different, the titles were different, the costume was different, the police box prop was different, the background music was different. And I went up to see my mate Carl, who also loved Doctor Who, and we used to play Doctor Who in the playground at primary school. And he hadn't seen part 1 of The Leisure Hive because Buck Rogers was on. And thereafter, for the whole of season 18, I was the only one in the school who still watched Doctor Who. And I felt really lonely, I have to say. It felt like the rug had been ripped out from under me, that it had gone from this thing that everybody watched. They didn't all love it to the degree I loved.
Yeah, whether they loved it or not, everybody did
they
watch
watched it. And you would say on Monday, did you watch Doctor Who on Saturday? And you would talk about it. That suddenly evaporated with the arrival of Buck Rogers. Then when they moved it to Monday and Tuesday nights to get it away from Buck Rogers, Peter Davison had took it over. So then there were discussions as to whether Peter Davison was as good as Tom Baker. There was a lot of that, but people were watching it again. And then when you get to, like you say, the 5 Doctors was a big deal. And then when you get to, I guess, Colin Baker arriving, I think that might have been the start of people feeling it's had its day, really. It's run its course. And then, like you say, the big hit in '85 with Michael Grade trying to cancel it, and it being very public, the way that was done. Like you say, if the BBC don't think it's any good, and he's laughing at the cheap special effects and all of that, then the public feel like they can too, don't they? You know, and they can have a pop at you for loving it. Yeah, you don't like that rubbish, do you? Those sort of remarks. And then when Sylvester came along and it was put on opposite Coronation Street, that really was a kick in the teeth. How can Doctor Who compete against Coronation Street? At that time, it was being watched by 19 million people. It had just announced, I think when season 26 went out, I think they just announced and started their 3rd weekly episode, Coronation Street.
That's right.
So it was a big deal. There was a big
I would say that was probably
line.
the height of Coronation Street's popularity around that time.
Yeah. And fans like me, who I love Doctor Who and was willing it to survive, I would have to wait until my mother had watched Coronation Street and then watched my video recording of Doctor Who. So someone who really loves Doctor Who, not counted in the ratings. You know, I do wonder how many people really watched it. You know, 4 to 5 million are the quoted figures, but how many more were taping it and then watching it afterwards? There must have been a couple more million at least added to that figure. But it was seen as a laughing stock by then. And if you loved it, you were a laughing stock. That's certainly how I felt. Yeah, and by then I'd started my first part-time job. I'd left school, started my first part-time job. All the trauma I went through when I first went to secondary school was repeated. It started again. I had to now go into the working world and being rather bashful and shy and socially awkward. That was a nightmare. So Doctor Who was even more the anchor then, because the other things I loved, they'd all been discontinued. I loved the tripods. That had gone. Michael Grade and Jonathan Powell had killed that off.
Finished that off as well.
And, you know, to film and broadcast 2/3 of a trilogy and then not bother with the final third, even now, it's insane. So that
inexplicable, doesn't it?
That had gone because they were saving money. I know the BBC was in a financial crisis at the time, and that's why they were targeting science fiction. That was expensive.
When aren't they? If you ask the BBC, they're always in a financial crisis.
Yeah. So they got rid of one of my favourite programmes and you know, unfairly kicked the other one. And then by the time I was 19, you know, when Survival aired in December of that year, that was it. It was gone. And then I had to I can remember the awful feeling because there was no announcement. I can remember thinking September 1990, season 27, you know, looking out for the trailers for it, you know. and just realizing by the time we got to the end of October, oh, it isn't coming back. And then navigating my young adult life then without it as a new program.
So given the fact that once the series wasn't on air, were there people in your life that, you know, when the series went off and it became obvious, obviously with the passage of time, that it wasn't coming back, did anybody in your life take pleasure in the fact that something that you loved was being denied you, had disappeared, wasn't there for you anymore?
I'm not so much take pleasure, but I remember my mother saying that when the Virgin New Adventures were being published, and
so they started in 91, didn't they?
Yeah, 91. So I was 21. So the Virgin New Adventures, I bought Exodus by Terrence Dicks because I knew it would be good because it was Terrence Dicks, and it was. And there was some sort of something on television about Doctor Who and whether or not it would come back, or some discussion program. And my mother just observed, the BBC are irritated because it won't go away. You know, they've killed it off. Yeah. And now we've got this series of novels and there are videos coming out, and Doctor Who fans still getting a dose of Doctor Who one way or another. And I remember her observing that it won't go away. And I think she was possibly voicing her own feelings as well when she said that she was hoping it would.
Exasperated. So she didn't feel for you. Because, you know, be careful what you wish for. There was her son. He hadn't got that thing anymore. She didn't feel for you in any way. She just relieved it was off.
Yeah. Well, she was very critical of it as a program. She felt, like many others did at the time, that it had run its course. They were flogging a dead horse. She felt the direction it went in, because she did quite like Colin Baker as an actor, and she felt, because obviously she was growing when she grew up. When she was watching Doctor Who, she was 18 when it began with William Hartnell. So she saw Colin Baker as a return to form. Colin Baker was playing it the way William Hartnell would do. And so she liked him. She didn't like Sylvester McCoy. She didn't think he was the right choice. She didn't like the style of the stories. She didn't like things like Paradise Towers. She thought that they were really clutching at straws, trying to drag it out when really it just needed to stop. So when it did stop, it was, to her, it was, well, good.
So how did you respond?
For me, how
did you respond to it not being on? I mean, because obviously there was the Day of Action in 1990. Did you join that? Did you write? Did you phone the BBC? How did you voice your disappointment and this feeling of being left somewhat bereft by the absence of this show? How did you express that in any way? Where did you put that energy? Because
I think I probably did write to the BBC, because Doctor Who magazine had an address in the back pages that if you wanted to, they were basically trying to encourage a letter writing campaign, you know. So you would write to Peter Cragene. That was the address that they gave you. Write to Peter Cragene, and then there was that kind of standard response published in the magazine that was in the back pages of quite a few issues about it languishing in the backwaters of public appreciation, and it just needs a little rest. So you were kind of just given that as the answer. So writing to Peter Cragene was a pointless exercise, really. But I mean, if we want to talk about writing letters when the program was still on air, I did have my frustrations with the way it was going in the McCoy era. I used to write
as you made your way through adolescence. Your appreciation of it kind of changed, and that inclination you had to notice the production values when things would change for the better would get your attention. Elements to the show, not all of them would please you then, as the McCoy era.
Well, I was with it having been, they'd attempted to kill it off in '85, and then it came back with Colin 18 months later, and didn't perform well because it was up against the A-Team and Robin of Sherwood and very, very popular and new programs on ITV. And so they blame the viewing figures, the low viewing figures, on Colin Baker and fire him off. And all of this was known to the public that this was going on. So when we got to Sylvester McCoy, I was very aware that whatever they did next would either make it or break it. And I think a lot of fans at that time, who were like me in the late teens or early 20s, were very aware that whatever direction they go in, if the public don't take to it, that will be the end of it. Yeah. And it felt like it was going in the wrong direction. I'm not talking about the Andrew Cartmel master plan here. I'm talking about initially. We now know that season 24 was put together very quickly. It was written quickly. John Nathan Turner thought he was moving on to other things and then was told, no, you've got to produce it. And he had 3 months to get it together. No writers, no script editor.
McCoy himself was sort of cast 1 week, and then it was only 4 or 5 weeks later he was in the studio doing the thing.
Yeah. And no one really knew what they were doing. It was thrown together very quickly. You've got a script editor who's got no background in writing for television. I don't think he had. It was all comic books and graphic novels. And he kind of went in that direction with it. He saw the previous versions of Doctor Who as old-fashioned, I suppose. He once described the Davison TARDIS scenes, which I love, in Earthshock and Visitation and various others. He described it as neighbours with roundels on the wall. So he wanted to get rid of all of that and make it funky. That was his key word, his watchword, funky. And he did. You know, you can see that starting to drip through season 24 and what comes later.
At least Andrew Cartmel did have a vision for it, which was eluding JNT by that point, wasn't it?
Yeah. And some have said that JNT was really didn't care by that point because he'd been told that if he gave Colin Baker the bad news, he could also leave. And then not that long after, there's a change of controller. Michael Grade leaves. Jonathan Powell comes in and says, you've got to produce next year. And he says, well, I don't have a leading man. I don't have a script editor or any writers commissioned. It can't be done. And then he gets told if he doesn't do it, he won't work on anything else in the BBC. So you've got this man who's got to produce something he doesn't want to produce and stay on this show that he's tired of. So I can see John just leaving Andrew and the writers to it, really, keeping a watchful eye over content and, you know, making sure they don't overstep the mark on things. But as far as the creative side of it goes, leaving them to it. And you can kind of see that in season 24, that they're all finding their way. They're all people who've not really got any background in Doctor Who, and they don't really know what works and what doesn't. And it's only really by season 25 that they're starting to find their feet. And then by season 26, they've cracked it. They know what works and what doesn't, and it shows. So I was very aware as a fan that the public were rejecting it. They rejected Sylvester
because it's
McCoy.
fine. It's fine, isn't it, Will, for Andrew Cartmel to be on a professional learning curve. That's very right. We've all been on them. And you could say that he got there probably quicker than a lot. But the fact of the matter was, at that moment in time, there wasn't enough of a well of affection and a willingness of patience from the potential audience to wait for that show to start hitting pay dirt again.
Yeah. I can remember Paradise Towers airing, you know, and watching Richard Bryars doing his possessed caretaker routine, and I can remember thinking they're just gonna laugh at me at work when they see this. You know, I was going to the point where I was hoping no one I knew had seen it. You know, your big favorite, Delta and the Bannermen. I can remember enjoying it, but knowing that that people who know me would just think, what are they doing with this? What is going on? What Doctor
It represented the very
antithesis
of what people thought Doctor Who should be doing at that time.
Yeah. Although, Delta and the Bannermen is one of my stories where now, if I'm at a low ebb emotionally and I want to watch something, but not after, I don't want it to tax my mind too much. I just want to enjoy it. I can stick Delta and the Bannermen on and really just get lost in it, So I've kind of reevaluated that over the years, that one. But when you're watching in Dragonfire, you're watching Sylvester McCoy and Bonnie Langford pretending to slide around on polystyrene snow, and corrugated plastic stands in for shards of ice. The public had no time for that then. Doctor Who fandom was getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and you had this core of people who were very, very obsessed with it, and you also had a division within those people. This is why I often make a comparison with the Jodie Whittaker era and the Sylvester McCoy era, because you have a wider public that are not interested at all, and then you've got fans who are divided. Some absolutely love the direction it's going in and think it's a breath of fresh air. Others think it's all going wrong and the show's going to be cancelled. And that's how it felt then when I was in my late teens. So when you ask, how was I feeling towards the end of it, I was willing it to survive. Don't cancel it.
Don't flatline this show.
And when we got to Curse of Fenric, I remember watching the Curse of Fenric, and a rare thing, which shows to me how good the Curse of Fenric was. I absolutely loved it. And then when we got to the end of the last episode and Sylv and Sophie go off Maiden's Point, and the undercurrents and all of that, and Sylv just goes, "Not anymore," and he goes off and the theme tune comes in, and my mum just went, "That was good." And that from my mother, who felt Doctor Who, was well past its time for her to say anything positive about it. I thought, okay. And of course, the very next story turns out to be the last one, and it's cancelled. So then there was the frustration of they were just getting there. They were just almost there, and it's killed off. So yeah, very frustrating that was, and heartbreaking when I realised it was not coming back. That terrible realisation, as I say, that gradual realisation, because there was no announcement. You were just left to realise, okay, it ain't coming back.
If you're anything like me, you would, I used to scour the letters page of things like Radio Times. Somebody would ask about it, and there'd be a 2-line response, and I would cut that out and keep that. Latch onto that. You expected Doctor Who magazine to say encouraging and positive things, so that was always there, and they always did. I don't think they ever gave us false hope. They did just report what genuine rumours and genuine efforts. They didn't pull any punches in the official magazine. I have to give John Freeman credit for that. He was the editor at the time, wasn't he, John? And then Gary Russell after that. But newspapers did report.
I don't know if you want to go here, Dan, but there is a sort of darker side to the obsession as well. Talking about writing letters and that sort of thing. When Remembrance of the Daleks was shown, I was so thrilled that it was back on track. I thought, oh, they've cracked it now after season 24. And I love the way
that 4 weeks was an incredible month to be a Doctor Who fan. It was a bravura story, wasn't it?
It was great. I've got I'll just try if I can try and find it in here. Where is it?
All of a sudden, everybody was back in love with the show again. The people who were seeing it, and word was gradually getting around that this was pretty damn good.
Yeah, this is a letter from Andrew Cartmel.
Andrew Cartmel.
Yeah, well, I wrote to Andrew Cartmel. So here we are. There's his signature. I wrote to Andrew Cartmel after Remembrance of the Daleks had been shown. Well, after the happiness had Happiness Patrol had been shown.
Yeah.
So this is how fanaticism starts to kind of go wrong, really, and obsession. So Thrilled to Bits, that Remembrance of the Daleks, is more like a sort of traditional Doctor Who story. And then the Happiness Patrol comes on, and it's like, this is more like Paradise Towers again. And not really appreciating what the Happiness Patrol is supposed to be, really. All I saw was Bertie Bassett and people wearing bright wigs, and I didn't get that it was a kind of Roald Dahl, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory type dark story, or something like The Prisoner, where everyone's a number.
Elements of The Prisoner are in there as well. But I was teased mercilessly about the Happiness Patrol, every single aspect.
I knew Silver Nemesis was coming up, and that would have the Cybermen in. I was looking forward to that. But I also knew there was something called The Greatest Show in the Galaxy at the end of the season. And I suspected that was going to be more Happiness Patrol, Paradise Towers. So I wrote to Andrew Cartmel and kind of told him where he's going wrong. And he writes to me, "Dear Mr. Hadcroft, I'm glad you like Remembrance of the Daleks, and I'm sorry you dislike the Happiness Patrol. However, I disagree with you. You say, please treat it like an adult program." He quotes me there. "I feel the Happiness Patrol is dark and powerful and quite adult. As for The Greatest Show in the Galaxy, don't prejudge." So I kind of think that was a very polite and kind response, considering how critical I was. The thing that gets me now thinking back about that is, I would slag off the production team for the direction they're taking it in. And then I would, not many months later, send in a story idea, thinking that they might take me up on it and I would be commissioned to write it. I don't know what I was thinking, but this is how disconnected from reality I'd become at that point. I lived in the world of Doctor Who. I had other things going on as well, and I did have friends, and but not a great many of them, and certainly nobody who was interested in the things I was interested in. So I kind of lived in this bubble of Doctor Who, which I took very seriously. So writing a letter to Andrew Cartmel and telling him where he's going wrong, but then a few months later sending a story idea and thinking I might be the next Andrew Smith and get commissioned to write something. Why would he want to commission someone who's just told him he's rubbish? But I didn't think that at all. And another one, after Remembrance was shown, I wrote a letter to Doctor Who magazine, and basically sort of praising them for returning it to its former glory. It's more traditional, and this is what Doctor Who needs to be. Well done, keep it up. But then, as the season unfolds, I see that we've got stories like the Happiness Patrol and The Greatest Show in the Galaxy, which I did not appreciate at the time at all. And I said something in the letter like, this proves that John Nathan Turner can produce decent Doctor Who. So why hasn't he done it for the last 8 years? That was how it ended. And when DWM published it, I was so thrilled. They've published my letter. I've told John Nathan Turner what I think, and it's published in a magazine. And I now look back on that with regret and embarrassment. And I wish John was still around so that I could say, John, I wish I hadn't done that. Because A, it isn't true. There were many stories from the preceding 8 years that I did love. Season 18, pretty much the whole of it. Many stories from the Davison era, pretty much almost everything from Colin Baker's time. The Trial of a Time Lord was a bit up and down and a bit ropey, but I even like the Trial of a Time Lord. And it really, where it went wrong for me was season 24. So I was completely in error to be so sarcastic and smug and say, you know, why didn't you turn out good stuff the previous 8 years? Now, the thing is, he didn't respond to that. Whenever I wrote a letter to him, I always got a reply and, you know, a few short comments and stay tuned, John Nathan Turner and all that.
Oh, so you had written to him personally several times?
On and off, yeah, over different things. And I always got a short paragraph as a response, which is, when you think about the postbag he must have got, and you could see that it was a personal reply, you know, albeit typed out by a secretary, but it was, you knew it was from him.
It's personal.
I now really regret being, you know, so critical publicly of him. And I think about some of these guys who are on YouTube now, you know, these young men who are so vocal and have so much to say, and people on Twitter, you know, they say such things about producers and writers, and they don't think, as I didn't think back then when I was 18, that there are people on the other end of those remarks, you know, that people with feelings are going to be hurt or angered by what fans are saying. And it's that disconnect again. You just see the program, it's a program that you love, you've loved it all your life, and these people are ruining it. And that's all you see. You don't see people working very hard trying to make something.
There is an element to it, though, Will. I have to say, where people feel, particularly license fee payers, when it comes to the BBC, where they feel like they've already paid for this stuff,
right?
And therefore they feel, I don't think they feel entitled, but they feel justified in being permitted a right of reply. And that's why, to be fair, that's why the BBC and ITV never did this, or certainly that I can ever remember, but that's why the BBC, they had shows such as Open Air and Points of View. Points of View had existed since the early 60s, hadn't it? So they always traditionally, the BBC always afforded a channel of communication with the audience. And if you remember some of those phone-ins they used to have on Open Air, you know, and Doctor Who was on a couple of them, it was no holds barred on those phone-ins. That I would imagine they did screen the calls up to a point. But a lot of the time, those shows were very lively. Sometimes callers were, I'd say, the word you would use now is unfiltered, but certainly very, very strident and very candid in the things that they were saying. And then back then, the BBC, I'm not so sure about individuals. I agree. Individuals who've done a job of work and picked up their money and gone home, I think it's slightly different, particularly for actors. They've stood where they've been told to stand. They've worn what they've been told to wear and said what they've been told to say, how a director wanted them to say it. I think it's different for actors. But with producers and directors, this is public money. Yeah. If to accept a job with the BBC probably should come with an expectation of that there is that genuine duty to serve the public, something that is fit for purpose and that is worth their license fee. That's how people say. Yeah. So I think the stuff that goes on.
I don't have any problem. I don't have any problem with that. I don't have any problem with people speaking their mind. But I think with the arrival of the internet, I basically think that you've been too hard on yourself. Yeah. And whilst I do think that everybody having their own platform on something such as Twitter or on YouTube is open to a kind of abuse, I suppose you could say. I think I'm not going to. I suppose what I'm saying is, if I was on the receiving end of some remarks that are made about various individuals, you know, I would be very hurt. If somebody said that Resurrection Plant's a load of rubbish, Will Hadcroft can't write for toffee, etc., you know, calls himself a writer, I'd take it on the chin. But if I was getting it repeatedly and really scathing, you know, and full of swearing and all of that,
yes,
it would affect me. And because I'm
Well, politeness costs nothing, does it? And
yeah, I don't. If somebody says I don't like your story, well, fair enough. There are lots of other stories I don't like, and I am a fan. I know what it feels like to be passionate, and I know what it feels like to see a series going wrong, something that you've loved a long time, and you're thinking, what are they doing with it? It's going to be cancelled if they don't get this right. Because I went through that before when I was a teenager.
If you could speak to Andrew, for example, Andrew Cartmell's very active still in Doctor Who fandom. He's a novelist now, very successful novelist and a podcaster and all-round sort of good guy. He's been a stand-up comedian. He's done all sorts of things. How do you think Andrew would feel about the way that you feel about that all this time on? Have you ever been tempted to speak to him about it? I doubt that he would remember that particular exchange, but because I've always got the impression that even though Andrew was quite young then and very early in his career, and by his own admission inexperienced, I suspect that he had a pragmatic view of his role then. I think his reply to you in that letter, I think he treated you with respect and with dignity, and regardless of your age, regardless of your tone. I think he upholds his end of the bargain as a representative of the BBC in that instance back in '88. Beautifully, excellent.
I now looking back on JNT and Andrew Cartmell, I admire them so much now. Looking back, that they were so kind, really. To be on the receiving end of
not just kind. Will, I believe that they were understanding. I don't know whether they knew that you were 18 or not, but I think that they knew. For all they knew, you were paying that license fee every month, and you were entitled to say your piece, and they were, if time permitting, they should do you the dignity of listening to you and ideally sending you some sort of response.
Well, I think the kindness is in replying, really. They could have just thought, oh, here's another flipping moaning fan. We're trying to
file it away, crunching in the ball, throwing it
this program as best we can, and all they're doing is kicking us at every turn. And they could have just seen my letter as another one of those. Oh, here we go again. The fan press and the fans, they call themselves fans, but they don't appear to like it. What are they fans of? And this idea that it's not as good as it used to be, and that was hanging around their necks all the time. So I look back now as a 53-year-old and I do think it was a kindness to reply, keep it dignified, say, I don't agree with you, but and when he said about Greatest Show, don't prejudge, So he was kind of telling me off, but in a kind way.
In a kind way, and he was standing up for his production, which is absolutely right that he do that. But he wasn't saying, for example, "Well, go and bugger off and watch something else," then, which is what we do see program makers and filmmakers doing that now.
Well, this is one of the things where it backfires terribly, and this is why the internet has changed it all, really.
See, that just makes people, we talk about YouTubers and even people on Twitter to a lesser, but this fuels the same engine, and everything goes round and round in circles then, because the outrage, it fuels itself.
Yeah, there are a couple of things that I'm thinking of to do with this, that where it does backfire. There was a young man, he looked like he was in his early 20s or something, and he was made this video about the Sixth Doctor, right? Okay. And he's going on and on about everybody knows the Sixth Doctor is awful. Everybody knows the stories are rubbish, and it's feeding off its own mythology, and no wonder it got cancelled and Colin Baker was fired. And then some months later, he puts out another video where he says, I was watching television and just channel hopping, and I landed on the BBC or whatever, and it was a Doctor Who's about to come on. They'd announced a Doctor Who story. So this lad's in his early 20s, so he's not grown up watching the classic era, and he's just going off, received wisdom, as it were. And he says, as the credits start, he said he groaned inside. Oh no, it's Colin. It's going to be a Sixth Doctor one. Okay, let's see which one it is. So the story begins, and he says, and he's quite frank. I'll credit him with that. He says after a while he starts thinking, "Hey, this is good." And then Colin's giving his performance as the Doctor, and he likes Colin's performance, and he ends up watching the whole thing right through. And then he says at the end of his presentation on YouTube, "I have a confession to make. I've never seen any Colin Baker episodes before."
I was going to ask you about that when you started the anecdote.
I thought, good grief, man. You can't make videos about how rubbish the era is if you've never seen any of it. And he was just going off received wisdom, as we call it, fan wisdom and fan lore. I admire his candor. He came out and said it. He admitted it. But at the same time, to be so vocal about something that you don't really know anything about. As he gets older, he's going to look back the way I look back on my youth and the things that I've said and done. He'll be embarrassed by that, I'm sure. And then more recently, we've had incidents, on Twitter, exchanges. I think over the last few years, we've had kind of, people will go on Twitter and say something about a production. And then they get a member of the production team replying to it. And that must be quite strange, that. But again, I think people tweet things not expecting. They either don't expect the person they're criticizing to see the criticism, but they certainly don't expect to get a very blunt reply. And I think this is where the internet has changed it, really. So your obsessive nature and your passion for it, so you feel so strongly you want to say something, and then you get a response that's quite prickly. I do wonder what the effect on the fan is to receive something like that from the people who make the program, because it's not like John Nathan Turner and Andrew Cartmel sending a polite letter. This is more direct, isn't it? The trouble with the internet is that you're now able to say something off the top of your head without thinking. And I think that's where some fans get unstuck, really. Because when you write a letter, the old-fashioned way, you have to think about what you're writing. You might leave it a day and then go over it before you post it, You
may write a couple of drafts or...
Yeah.
Consider every word.
And you might still be angry and still send it off, but you've had time to think. Whereas it's so immediate, Twitter. I mean, you get when a program is, the closing credits go up, and then immediately on Twitter, it's filling up with all these remarks about how good or terrible the episode was. And it's a different world we live in, really. And it's not good for people who are like us, I think. I think that side of it.
Just to round things off, that was kind of my question. Really, we've talked about obsession, obsessiveness, and how it can be a good thing in some respects, or it can be channeled in a positive way, but it can be debilitating in others if we allow it to be, I suppose. Where do you think in the modern age, where we've all got these devices, as I say, that we carry around in our pockets or bags or whatever, where we may get that initial rush of, so you may send a tweet there, all right, I've put that out there in my completely unfiltered view of this, and you feel good for getting something out there. But if it ever does sort of come back on a person, if you are different personality types are going to receive that differently, aren't they? So do you think that perhaps people should still, I'm not suggesting people shouldn't have that voice, that right of reply. I believe that's very, very important. But because the means has changed, like I say, you'd write into points of view. You'd send the letter. You'd send the letter in 1 week. They'd probably get it 4 or 5 days later. You may get it read out on the show the week after. It had got that. Whereas Twitter and such as that is very, or email even, is very immediate, isn't it? You can people draft emails, obviously generally take more time about them, but it's still very, very fast. So do you think that people who are on the spectrum, that use of social media, which we know, it's been proven, scientifically proven, every metric that we've got says that the use of social media is addictive.
Yeah.
But social media is a particularly, it could be a particularly detrimental thing to people who are on the spectrum.
Yeah, I think
we must accept that there's a large percentage of Doctor Who fans. A lot of us are on the spectrum in one place or another.
And because of that, we're vulnerable. There's a lot of vulnerable people who, they have emotional issues. Some might suffer from mental health problems, depression,
social anxieties.
Yeah, and they might. I mean, let's say someone's bipolar, for example. So they're in one of their, dark moods, and they might say something on social media, and then their remark gets out there, and they are vilified by the rest of fandom for what they've said.
Happens most weeks.
But fandom don't know this person's got bipolar, and they'll come back up. And
it's helped to talk about these things, doesn't it? About the nature of our obsession with this show, about where it comes from, and even if we have no idea where it's going to end, the program,
and to recognise that there are pluses and negatives. That there are, if like you say, you can steer it as a sort of career. There are many benefits. All the showrunners that we've had to date have all grown up with Doctor Who, being obsessed with it, and then become the showrunner. So, and many of the writers, and even two of the Doctors, David Tennant and Peter Capaldi, were very into Doctor Who as young people, and then became Doctor Who. So they're real major pluses to being obsessed with this show. The darker side is some of the other things that we've discussed that are not good for the fan community, and they're not good for you personally, especially when they backfire.
60 years of Doctor Who this year, Will, and obviously fans, we love writing lists. And we love anniversaries, don't we? What amuses me about the 60th anniversary, the response that I'm seeing again on social media and generally speaking, is how many fans are talking about the 70th anniversary or the 75th anniversary. if we don't get that for this one, maybe we'll get it for the next one. That's got to be unique to Doctor Who fans as well. That speaks to a very particular part of a very particular kind of person, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. I think now this is something else that Russell said years ago, that if it ever got cancelled, he knows that all that would happen was a period of time would go by, and then they'd say, let's bring back Doctor Who. And I kind of have that view of it myself. When it went away in '89, I was really affected. But I know if it went away again, because of the experience of '89 and the interim, I know it would come back. My mother was right when she said it won't go away. And for as long as there are people like me and you, Dan, and the folks watching this program, as long as we're about, it won't go away.
I feel like we've only done half of your journey with Doctor Who here. I think we'll have to get together and have a second half of this very conversation. Well, I feel like we've got up to the early 90s, haven't we? Maybe we should do this again and bring it up to date at a later date. What do you think?
That would be that's very kind of you to say so. I haven't bored you to death for 2 hours.
In the meantime, though,
I would be happy to come back, certainly.
Let's remind people that you are a published author. You have this is available now, isn't it? That people can get this. Where can they get it?
Yeah, so Amazon, obviously, you can get it from the BBC themselves. You might even be able to get it from Waterstones if they still stock audio books on CD. You can get it on CD, and you can get it as a digital download. So if you like a physical product, and I do, then it's available on CD. If you're not bothered about that, then digital download. And it's an hour-long story. It's not an audio drama. It's not a full cast thing. It's an hour-long story read by one voice, Fraser Hines, who is remarkable when it comes to impersonating the second Doctor. So you get the voice of Jamie, and you get the voice of the Doctor as well. And it performs very well as all the sort of guest characters, if you like, that I've created. And then you've got this wonderful sound design by David Rucroft, who's come up with the sound effects for it and the incidental music score. And he really brings it to life because it's sort of set in an industrial world of foundries and factories and the like. And when I was describing in the narrative the klaxon going off in the distance and the clanging of metal, I was hoping when I was writing that whoever did the sound design would put those sounds in the background. And he's done a marvelous job of it. I'm really proud. When I heard it, because they don't send you any preview stuff. You get to hear it when everybody else does. So I got my complimentary copies through the post after it had been published. So so I put it on the big stereo system to get the full experience of it. And I was blown away by it. I thought if I don't get to do any more of these, or if this is my only venture into writing a Doctor Who, what a great one to have done. I'm really happy with the way it's come across. And those of us who like a bit of continuity, there's some Doctor Who continuity in it. And I'll just say this, Dan, what if the Doctor, because this is pre-war games, yeah? So the Doctor is very secretive. He doesn't tell anybody who or what he is, including his companions. Nobody knew he was a Time Lord or where he was from or anything. What if he was to come across somebody who could expose that? Would he be so keen on doing what he normally does, in tackling the bad guys? So if that sort of thing interests you, then alongside the family story that is there, you've got a little bit of mythology mixed in. And I really like the way it's been developed, and I really like the way it sounds. I'm very proud of it.
Congratulations, Will, on Doctor Who, The Resurrection Plant, available to order now pretty much wherever you can get your audio books. Jump on it, obviously. Thanks for this, Will. I hope you've enjoyed it. We've covered a lot of ground, haven't we, over the last couple of hours here on
I know.
Type 40 Extra. Good stuff. And if people want to reach out to you on social media, if you've got a social media, do you do Twitter and things like that?
Facebook. Yeah, Will Hadcroft. You'll just find me there. Twitter. You've got to watch out for Twitter, because I was originally at Will Hadcroft, and then somebody hacked into it, and I had to close that off and start again. So I'm slowly building up my following again. Now it's at Hadcroft Will. So I'm back to front now. But that's where you'll find me on Twitter. And I've got a website that should be updated more often than it is. So if you go to willhadcroft.com, you'll see some things on there, and an email address if you want to drop me a line.
Oh, we'll have to get that and put it in the description of the video too. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Check you're still subscribed, and hit the cloister bell to get all the notifications about what we're doing next and when we're doing it. I can tell you what's coming next. Type 40 Live, Thursdays from 8 p.m. here on the channel. And this time, heaven knows where we're going. Well, I've got a fair idea. I've always got a general idea, but you know what the Doctor Who universe is like. Something could explode between now and then. And on this show, the conversation itself is often explosive too. So yeah, hit the cloister bell so you get the notifications and you don't miss Type 40 Live. Get your weekend off to an early Whovian start there with us here in the console room. And you can reach
every time you put that up, Dan, I want a Jaffa cake immediately afterwards, and I want one of those mugs.
There you go. Yeah, well, more on that coming soon. Come to think of it, the Red Bubble shop we had a couple of teething problems with the Red Bubble shop, but it is up, and it's on its way. You could be able to get the mugs in your life and on your table very soon. The Jaffa cakes. yeah, you're going to have to do that yourselves. But other than that, yeah, the mugs, everything else is coming. Yeah, reach out to me through Instagram and Twitter. I'm there as the Spacebook, wheezing, groaning, ranting, raving about all things geeky inside and outside of the TARDIS. And yeah, please, yeah, if you haven't already, like this video, subscribe to the channel, all that jazz. Don't miss Type 40 live in a couple of days' time. And yeah, thank you. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. We always have the time, if you have the space, here at Type 40 Extra. That's it for another one. See you again soon. Bye-bye, everybody. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.